All right, I'm going to paint a picture for you guys. Super Bowl Sunday. It's Philadelphia's turn to win this year. All eyes are on Philly as the confetti drops in the background. And on X, everything is ablaze because somebody officially submitted incriminating evidence against Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania for his involvement with the attempted assassination of Trump during the Butler County rally.
I remember the moment when a friend of mine who's been involved in politics to an extent texted me a picture of Donald Trump with blood on his face, and all he said was, "This just happened." And it felt like my heart stopped.
So, I don't know if you guys heard about that or even saw it on X. It got kind of squashed pretty quickly. Because it appears as though it's just hearsay, and this is just somebody, they're calling her, her name is Hadassah Feinberg, and she is considered the Aaron Brockovich of Pennsylvania. She officially put in a criminal complaint against Shapiro for colluding with the Pennsylvania police force to not only assist in the assassination attempt, but to help cover up all of the inconsistencies. And within all of that, she's also accusing Christopher Wray of helping. Obviously, the FBI is going to have something to do with it, and then they're not coming up with answers, and people are asking questions, and they're saying, well, we don't know anything yet. And she's actually putting it on the spotlight right now.
Here's my first thought. It is interesting. I did see that Trump was at the Super Bowl, and I did hear that he sat far up in the back where he was behind everybody instead of somebody else being behind him. So that's interesting that, you know, he made that decision, and that he may have left early. He just made an appearance and then you know, got out of there. But this whole story feels like a national treasure moment. I don't know if y'all have ever seen that film where
someone's going to steal the Declaration of Independence.
But the story feels so big, and it's elevated. It's almost unrealistic. The characters go to the FBI, then they go to the Department of Homeland Security. They end up going to a national archivist because nobody else will listen to them, you know, and she keeps telling them the same things that the FBI said. And then immediately after that, the next scene, the sidekick, Riley,
the guy in the chair
says, the guy in the chair says,
what if we go public, plaster the story all over the internet?
Then somebody's got to do something with it, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And as soon as I started reading into the story, that's exactly where my brain went, was when do you go from something being believable to something being so extremely out there that, you know, it's no one's ever going to believe it. If this is true, that's probably what happened ahead of time, or could potentially be what happened ahead of time, or it could have been shut down for other reasons. And I think that's what's happening right now. I think that's why the story is not blowing up more than it already has, is because people see the headline and they go, there's no way that could be true, right?
Yeah. I need to throw a couple things there because, and I would say I'm not sure myself that I'm convinced, but I would say that, you know, if I describe to you what a birthday party looks like, and then you walk into a room and you see balloons and you see cake, and you're probably going to not believe me if I tell you that's a wedding reception, you know, like you know what it looks like. If there's a puzzle piece and it goes like this. So what I'm going to say is, again, I'm not sure I'm convinced, but it says Biden also colluded with them, but Biden ordered that they look into the Secret Service. Okay. Yeah. I had a neighbor when I lived in Iowa that was a part of the police force in the city. And he said when Trump came in, they would partner with the Secret Service, and they would, because the local police know the area, they know what to do, and they would partner and stake things out, and they have like different responsibilities, and they're communicating. Mm-hmm. And what I noticed was that they looked into the Secret Service, but they had conclusions of significant security lapses. Head of Secret Service, Pittsburgh field office, and 4 agents were placed on administrative leave and all this stuff. But what about the local police? Did they just not look into that? And that's who's implicated in this. And so for me, that's kind of like,
that's exactly what it is.
And what I was saying before on another episode was that a lot of times leaders in government will do something and speak hard about it, and it looks like they're on the same team as you, but really there's this other thing that completely negates everything they just said that's kind of below the surface that you don't really see, you know.
Yeah, well, that's how like magic works, is, you know, the dangling the one thing over here, look over here, and yeah.
I'm going to break in for a second and say, if you're enjoying this episode, stick around, and at the end I'm going to show you how you can get access to exclusive content that's only found on locals.com.
I want to know more about who this lady making the accusations is, because I specifically did not look into this, so y'all could educate me and teach me what the heck was going on. So who's making these accusations?
Yeah, she's a whistleblower. It's Hadassah Feinberg. She's Jewish, and she's a big part of the Jewish community there. So she's directly correlated to Shapiro, who's also in the Jewish community there, and a bunch of other people.
She has a strong connection to this whole plot because just a quick Google search shows that she's a former Pennsylvania State Police employee.
Yeah, so she knows all of the people who are involved.
She could be a whistleblower. She could be a legitimate whistleblower.
This all started, from what I can tell, like when I got down to the root of it and where Feinberg got mostly upset, is she discovered that Shapiro was connected to Ellen Greenberg. Ellen Greenberg was the fiance of a man named Sam Goldberg. Sam came home one day and found her in the living room, unalived, and there's the whole transcripts of him talking about how she did this to herself. Turns out, after the coroners looked at her body, she was considered to be murdered because she had multiple stab wounds. And then shortly thereafter, magically somehow, and Shapiro is the one who made that happen. He was the district attorney at the time. And when you dig a little bit further, you find that Sam Goldberg is Shapiro's cousin. And if you really, really look at this whole case, it appears as though Goldberg might have had a little bit of something to do with what happened to Greenberg, considering everything going on in that story. It's just too weird. And so that's where it kind of all started. And that's why she's a whistleblower, because she's experienced this. And this is all within the Jewish community there. They're all very well connected.
It's just insane to consider why they would go about it that way. That doesn't make sense. That seems like a murder of rage, right? That is not normal. And that's the crazy thing to me, is how could somebody like Josh Shapiro or anybody presiding over that trial or over that case ever come to that conclusion unless they're just completely lying through their teeth and trying to cover something up.
Right.
Yeah. And I would say this, if you think about, like, why would they come to that conclusion, or why, like, you'll hear from me a lot, special interest, because there is, it doesn't really matter. 90% of people are not that informed on what's going on in the political world, really around the world, and that sort of thing. So most people will just see the headline. And so if they can find a way to get the headline that they want or avoid the headline they don't want, everybody kind of colluding together makes it work. So if you look at, I'd be interested to know who funded district attorneys, or who got these district attorneys in there. That's because you see in California, they're not prosecuting certain crimes because of who's funding the district attorneys, and it's all connected to these global elites. And so that's my point, is that it's like, well, hey, just make sure she's unalived is what they tell this person, and then we'll make sure the coroner knows how to call it. And then years later, and then there could be a threat there could be compromise, there's all kinds of reasons that it could be there. Maybe they're threatening their family, maybe they're just compromising themselves and they don't want to be exposed. So that's where I'm kind of saying, let's think a little bigger picture here of, like, it's not just some person giving a rogue opinion that doesn't know what they're doing. It's a bigger kind of picture here. And that's where I say, well, let's find out who funded Golding or Richard, the district attorney. Let's find out who funded these things. Let's find out other instances and that sort of thing.
We know one person that's funding Josh Shapiro.
Yeah.
I'll let you dive into that if you want to, Doug.
Yeah, that's a fun one. So you're going to be shocked by this answer. Mr. George Soros has had quite the crazy. What? Him again? Another.
I was avoiding saying that word when I say global elites. That's who I was referring to. Yeah,
mind blown.
Face of the global elite
emoji.
Yeah.
So I don't know exactly, because, like, if we go back to when Shapiro was a district attorney, I don't know who was funding him at that time necessarily, and I'm not sure if Soros had a lot to do with it. So considering the Greenberg situation, to me, it kind of looks more like a family affair, I'll just say. And then eventually, of course, Shapiro did get funded by Soros. It's still all, dovetails into itself.
Well, if I could jump in on the pattern thing, obviously, people talk about, previous, actions is the best indicator of what you're going to do in the future. So if you see a pattern of, like, okay, it looks very clearly like this Governor Shapiro guy covered up something in the past. But the only difference in this case is, like you were saying, Doug, that if the perpetrator was his cousin and he's covering for his cousin, that's a little bit different from a larger grand conspiracy of we're going to get the president assassinated and I'm going to cover for that. And now the pattern still remains of somebody being willing to be okay with being secondary to somebody's death, and then covering for that and the corruption that it takes for somebody to be willing to do that.
I feel like that's where the whole Ides of March connection comes into play. Like little compromises lead to big compromises. And it's
obviously we can't say for sure that Shapiro is guilty. We're going to have to wait and see. We're going to have to allow the investigators to follow the trail of evidence and see what conclusion they come to. If there really was a conspiracy against Trump, how does an individual get to the point where they're willing to do something like that? What compromises in life did the shooter himself make that eventually led him to that terrifying decision? When Reese started to talk about patterns, I started to think about the patterns in my own life. I might not be compromising in major ways, but am I really living the way I know I'm meant to live? And in the ways that I know I'm not, is it possible to break free from the pattern?
And I think also it could be, people who set these things up. I'll give an example. Like in China, this literally came from the Secret Service and diplomats going to training. They go to China and they say, look, if you go back to your hotel room and there's a female there, you should just know there's cameras in the room. And so what they would do is trap people. And then now that person does what China wants them to do. And so that's kind of an example of, okay, this is conjecture. I'm saying, it's alleged or whatever, but it could be that just there's this past thing that happened that now gives teeth, because there could be evidence of it that if brought forward would implicate someone, and it would be no more questions. And then the district attorney could move forward with that. But it's or you could just overlook what we're planning over here and let us go through with it. And then you just give a speech afterward and that's what we'll do. So I'm saying it's potential that maybe he wasn't even involved in it, but he knew about it happening. I don't know the details of this. Right. This is all conjecture. This is just where my mind goes on how this could happen, because they're yeah, but he gave a speech that condemned violence. And it's okay, yeah, they just want the headline. That's why certain politicians don't ever answer certain questions, or they always say the same thing over and over, because again, 90% of people aren't going to look into it. All they see is the headline. Oh, didn't happen. Yep. Oh, person's crazy. Oh, never happened. And if you look at the facts of just what happened, and I'm not saying this is the smoking gun, but if you look at the facts of okay, this flat roof wasn't covered, it was an obvious place, all these kinds of things, local police should have been there, the guy went up and then he got scared and ran down but didn't do anything. It's just kind of 0% of that makes any sense, right? And it's kind of who knows what's going on up at the top, and this guy said he would do that and this and that, and why he wouldn't so it's just,
add in the political aspect of Shapiro was being tapped for vice president. He was being considered for it. And with George Soros behind you and the possibility that you could be the vice president and trying to get all the obstacles out of your way, and you're just accustomed to the cops do whatever you want them to because they just have been for a long time because now they're implicated. It all sort of builds to this perfect little storm of corruption where it's I don't have to do anything. I'm not doing anything crazy other than just making sure that the right people are not in the right places.
Right. Sure. And I don't know if it's true or not, but another thing I read regarding the story is that Alex Soros, which I guess is the son of George Soros, was actually making threats toward Trump leading up to that day, to the assassination attempt. And some of those threats implied physical harm. Yeah.
They're very, very, very veiled threats.
Yes. And so there's another direct connection to potential motive, potential intent. I mean, obviously people can say whatever they want, and sometimes it's just, well, they shouldn't have said it. But I love what you said, Ryan, about the roof, and we see the footage come out, because I think that's really making Reese's point, which is we live in a different society now with the digital age that we're in. There's a greater level of accountability from the public side of things, because that's what we see. We see people posting videos that they got of the shooter before the rally was even, or before we even got to that moment in the rally, where the attempt happened. And people are posting these videos saying, I had a video of this guy before it even started, or 20 minutes earlier. And if they had that kind of coverage just from the crowd, and they could see it and they could film it, then that implicates something else. That implies that, okay, there was somebody that knew about it, and They didn't do anything about it, because if they see what's happening, then obviously those who are surveying the area and everything, they also know what's happening. So it definitely provides a level of accountability we haven't had in the past, and I think that's one of the reasons why we're going to get to the bottom of it. One way or another.
And this is it. Exactly. And it is very clear that it is one of two things or both. It is either willful conspiracy, like we've been talking about, or it is just absolute incompetence, which is very hard to believe. So in this case, and so it could be, the question is whether it's one or two people incompetence or conspiracy, or whether it's this grand thing.
It could also have been a willful conspiracy mixed with a passive action, passive response, because if somebody deep down hates Trump, and then it's like they're on the security team, they're not going to do as good of a job protecting him as they would have if it was somebody they loved. There is a moment there of like, well, I'm going to pretend like I'm not seeing what I'm seeing, that kind of thing, potentially.
The reason they didn't shoot him first was they were going for the Star Wars scene. They wanted Rito to shoot first, or what it was, Han Solo to shoot first. That's you got to let the bad guys shoot first before you shoot back. I think that's what they were going for. But my bad.
That's the DEI training coming through, I think, probably.
Oh, geez.
Yeah, don't shoot until they shoot at you. Then you shoot.
Look, that's pretty discriminatory. You think just because someone's got a gun pointing at somebody, they're going to shoot. Like, that's you bigot. Like, what are you doing? Like,
you can't make those kinds of assumptions.
The crazy thing is I went and I watched Josh Shapiro's update on the attempt on ABC News that was released literally the day after the attempt. In Butler, Pennsylvania. And so he gets on there and he delivers his response. And it was fairly emotional, to be honest. So no matter what, it's just the whole feel of it and the vibe and like the tone of it. It was like, the day after Trump's attempted assassination and the day after an innocent man lost his life, during that. And that's the thing that you start realizing is like, man, even though it didn't happen, somebody did die that day, and I'm sitting there watching it and I'm thinking to myself, man, if Josh Shapiro is guilty, he could have a career in acting as well, because he plays it so straight and so well. If he's not guilty, then he's just doing the normal thing. Right. But if he is, and it shows how in one sense, quote unquote, good of a politician he really is. Because he makes it seem very sincere. But at the same time, he does kind of have a slimy feel just in general to the way he talks. That is the crazy thing to me is like, I wonder what that feels like if you've just attempted to assassinate somebody and the next day you have to get up and talk about how you're so glad they didn't get assassinated.
There could be feelings of guilt as well that's behind that. Like, I'm just saying, like, it could be coming down on him, this conviction, or it could be like, wow, this other person died and that is not at all what they were going for. Like,
so a lot of things in this nation begin to change after the attempt on Trump's life. But perhaps shocking moments like these in history give us a chance to begin to change our own patterns, or at least make us aware of them. When I saw that text on my phone from my friend and I had that thought, maybe Trump's gone, the feeling that came over me was a reality of my own mortality. I suddenly realized I'm not going to live forever. And in fact, none of us are guaranteed tomorrow. As I looked into the story later, I found out the assassin was shot and he died a murderer. But at the same time, an innocent man in the crowd was also shot, and he died a hero as he shielded his family from harm. And I can't help but think, what decisions am I making right now that will affect the way people remember me when I'm gone? This week's exclusive episode is all about the US penny, and here is a sneak peek.
Trump has the power to stop the mint from creating new pennies, but he does not have the power through an executive order to eliminate the usage of the current pennies and to get rid of them completely. Mm-hmm. That would take an act of Congress.
Maybe they say, okay, we're not going to make these anymore because nobody's using them. But then all of a sudden now it's like, well, not enough are available. So now we have to go to a digital currency and that's where you kind of slide it in.
Inevitably, we're going into crypto in one form or another, like you said, whether or not it's centralized, decentralized. And that's a big argument in the crypto world too, is how are we going to do that? How are the feds going to use it and all that?
I do think that the penny should be eliminated, and I'm actually going to lean entirely on the logic of the half penny. The half penny was in circulation. It was minted for about 60 years. And the reason that they stopped minting the half penny was because during that time, inflation rose so much that they considered the half penny to have no buying power.
Getting rid of the pennies could make a small group of people incredibly rich. There's 3 major ways that a small group of people think that they're going to get rich off of the elimination of the penny.